You'll never be one of us, no matter how well you fold the napkins. I didn't react. Not then. I just smiled and set the table like nothing had happened. But that night, something inside me cracked in a way I didn't recognize until much later. Because by the time dessert was served, I understood. This wasn't just dinner. It was a quiet execution. And I was the only one who knew who was bleeding. Laundry? Gordon said, his voice dripping faux amusement. That explains why she's always trying to clean us up. The room chuckled. Not real laughter, not the belly kind. It was thinner than air and twice as sharp. Lena's smile was tight and rehearsed. Scott didn't even look up. The wine glasses caught the light like they were trying to reflect something holy, but there was nothing sacred in that room. I smiled. The kind of smile you reserve for a stranger who steps on your foot and doesn't apologize. The kind you use to survive. It was supposed to be a celebration. I had just wrapped my 5th year at the firm, one of the youngest senior associates to hold a client portfolio that large. Gordon had suggested dinner at his brother's place. Just the family, he'd said. Low-key. Lena's cooking. I brought a bottle of Chianti and a bouquet of ranunculus. They were never unwrapped. The flowers, I mean. Lena put them in the sink to trim the stems and never touched them again. The duck was overcooked. The wine was cheap. The tension was imported from somewhere between 1997 and Gordon's mother's expectations. I know what you're thinking. Why stay? Why not stand up? Throw your napkin down and walk out? Because the game doesn't end when you lose the first hand. And because I had seen the way Lena looked at me when I talked about work. I'd heard the way Gordon's tone changed when I mentioned the word compliance. Somewhere along the way, I became the mirror they didn't want to see. So I stayed. I stayed while Gordon reduced my career to a punchline. I stayed while Lena served a store-bought tiramisu and pretended it was homemade. I stayed while Scott finally looked up from his plate long enough to mumble, "She's good at what she does, though." Like it was a mercy. And Gordon? Gordon smiled at me like I was his adorable little pet project. "She's thorough," he added. "Meticulous. It's the laundromat in her." I looked at him then. Really looked. His shirt was crisp, his cufflinks understated, his posture smug. He thought he was being clever. I knew what he was being. And I knew this wasn't about laundry. It was about class. It was about control. And it was about the fact that I had built something clean from something broken, and they couldn't stand that I didn't need them to do it. Outside, the night smelled like rain and gasoline. The window behind me was open just a crack, and the chill snuck in like truth. I focused on it. On the cold. On the reality. Gordon poured himself more wine. "You should have seen the spreadsheet she made for our taxes," he said. Color-coded, cross-referenced. She even reconciled my gym membership receipts. "Do you do that at work too?" Lena asked, her voice light, but her eyes sharp. "Do you scrub other people's messes all day?" "No," I said, finally speaking. "At work we don't scrub. We document. And we remember." There was a silence after that. A real one. Not awkward. Sacred. Scott cleared his throat. "Dessert?" I stood before anyone could answer. "No, thank you." Gordon looked up, surprised. "Where are you going?" "Home." "Come on, Nat, don't be dramatic." That was when it happened. Not the insult. Not the tone. Not even the eye roll Lena tried to stifle. It was the use of that name. Nat. He knew I hated it. He knew it reduced me. He knew exactly what he was doing. I picked up my coat. My heels tapped on the hardwood like punctuation. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry in the car. I didn't call anyone. I went home, changed into running shoes, and walked to the river. The city was quiet. The sidewalks wet with the kind of drizzle that only shows up when no one needs it. I sat on a bench near the water, pulled out my phone, and opened the Notes app. We clean. Quietly. That's all I wrote. But I knew what I meant. And soon, so would they. Scott texted me Monday morning, like nothing had happened. Don't take it personally. He's from a different time. I stared at the screen. The words didn't land gently. They didn't soothe or explain. They landed like ice down the back of my spine. Cold, jarring, and a little insulting. A different time? Like it was a generational quirk to reduce a woman's career to a joke. Like it was charming to laugh at someone for working their way up from the daughter of a laundromat owner to senior counsel at one of the top 5 firms in the city. I knew the type of different time Scott meant. It was the kind that handed out jobs to old fraternity brothers and called it meritocracy. I didn't reply. By the time I reached my office, the firm was already humming. Morning emails buzzed through my inbox, a tangle of contracts, memos, and client updates. I sat down, pushed Gordon's voice out of my head, and buried myself in motion practice. But it didn't take long for the fire to find me. At 11:02 a.m., I was pulled into a quick sync. The partner on the antitrust team, Martin P., the kind of man who always smelled like bergamot and old power, had news. The FTC opened a preliminary screen on MediaGord Inc., he said. High-level conflict review in progress. We'll be putting up an ethical wall. I froze. Martin tilted his head slightly. I assume you know the connection. MediaGord. Gordon's media empire. The same one he built through mergers, spin-outs, and quietly devouring local newsrooms like bone marrow. It was his pride, his legacy, his platform for thinly veiled political influence. It was also now, possibly, a legal target. I know, I said. Then you understand we're walling you off from the matter. The air shifted. Excuse me? You're in a relationship with Gordon Bell, Natalie. Even if there's no financial link, the optics alone. I don't handle optics. I handle facts. Martin's mouth twitched. We're not accusing you of anything. It's just protocol. Internal policy. My pulse spiked, but I kept my face still. I'd faced worse in deposition rooms. I could face this. For how long? Initial 30 days. We'll reassess after preliminary filings. He moved on. Just like that. As if I hadn't just been silently labeled a liability. By 1:00 p.m., the ethical wall was official. I received a formal notice. Restricted access. Do not discuss. Do not advise. Do not review. I stared at the line that stung the most. You are not on the team. I'd worked 18 months preparing the firm for a possible MediaGord review. I flagged the early red flags. I compiled the background packages. I'd even drafted a white paper that made its way to the managing partner's inbox. Now I was cut off from it, because I'd slept next to the problem. I closed my laptop and left early. Not to cry, not to rage, to run. By the time I reached the river path, the sun was already low. Wind blew cold off the water, threading through my sleeves. I pulled my scarf tighter and ran faster. 1 mile, then 2. My breath came hard and uneven. My legs ached. There was a sharp stitch in my right side. But I kept going, because stopping felt worse. I passed an older man walking a corgi in a yellow sweater. A couple taking selfies with a thermos of something steaming. Life moved on, indifferent to my humiliation. And maybe that's what cut the deepest. When I finally slowed to a walk, I pulled out my phone, opened my notes again. I stared at the line from Saturday night. We clean, quietly. I tapped beneath it and added, we don't scream. We clean. Because I couldn't scream. Not at Martin. Not at Gordon. Not even at Scott, who meant well, but always looked away too quickly. Tuesday was colder. I wore a black turtleneck under a blazer and kept my eyes locked on briefs I wasn't allowed to submit. I reviewed a venture contract for a client in fintech. I edited a compliance report for a healthcare startup. I smiled during team lunch when someone brought cupcakes. None of it felt real. After hours, I sat in a glass conference room and stared at a whiteboard I wasn't allowed to write on. I watched a junior associate walk past with a file labeled Media Gourd Chronology and felt the bile rise. But I said nothing. Because I understood now. The wall wasn't just about policy, it was about trust. Or the absence of it. At 7:42 p.m., I checked Gordon's Instagram. He'd posted a picture of himself in a green room before a panel, smiling beside a former senator and a tech billionaire. His caption read, "The best disinfectant is sunlight, unless you're the mold." 57 likes, 11 comments, all praise. I closed the app and locked my phone. The silence in my chest felt like a new kind of scream. Wednesday morning, I arrived early. I wore heels that clicked with purpose, and a charcoal suit that said courtroom, even though I wasn't going anywhere near one. I pulled the conflict memo from the intranet. I reread the policy. Then, I opened a new document and typed, "Subject, request for reconsideration of wall placement." I kept it short, precise, professional. I have personal history with the media gourd matter, but I am prepared to follow all ethical protocols and maintain complete objectivity. My record reflects consistent discretion and policy adherence. I believe my contribution could be of significant value to the team. I hit send. And then I waited. That night, I walked home instead of running. The sky threatened rain. I didn't carry an umbrella. I didn't care. Outside my building, a man argued with someone on speakerphone. A car alarm bleated once in the distance. The city kept moving. I took the stairs. My apartment smelled like eucalyptus and old books. I took off my shoes and sat cross-legged on the floor. The rug was soft under my palms. Safe. I opened my phone. Not for news. Not for messages. Just one thing. Notes. I added one more line. We do not break. We bend. We burn if we have to. But we clean. And I meant it. The archive room smelled like dust and forgotten decisions. Rows of banker boxes lined the metal shelves, each one labeled in a hand no one could trace anymore. The kind of place where secrets go to sleep until someone desperate wakes them. I wasn't supposed to be here, not officially, but when the partner replied to my reconsideration email with, "We'll review in 2 weeks. Sit tight. This stays by the book," I understood what that meant. You're still not one of us. So I found a different door. It started with a quiet conversation with Jackie, one of the paralegals who'd been at the firm longer than most of the partners. She had a memory like a card catalog and a talent for hearing what wasn't said. "Looking for old media filings?" she asked, already halfway out of her chair. "Try Sub-Basement 2, Shelf 37B. That's where the 2009-2012 stuff went." I didn't ask how she knew. By the time I reached Shelf 37B, my pulse had settled into something slow and heavy. I moved past the boxes labeled early-stage startups and IP transfer disputes until I found a line of red folders that looked nearly untouched. The one I pulled down was labeled Media Gourd, Local Affiliate Audits, 2010. Inside were memos, old due diligence reports, clipped media coverage, and printouts of broadcast transcripts. It was all routine, boring, until it wasn't. The first trigger came halfway through a folder labeled Programming Archives, Q3, 2010. It was a transcript. A segment titled Hidden Costs, The Unwashed Truth Behind Local Laundromats. The video file was missing, but the words were enough. Voiceover. "Some say these neighborhood institutions keep communities clean, but is that bleach? Or just blinding us?" The segment described supposed hygiene violations at several family-run laundromats in the metro area. Unverified, anonymous tips. Unsubstantiated footage. Just enough fear to stain reputations. One of the laundromats mentioned? Clean Spin Wash Center. Family-run, East Side, 24 years in business. My mother's place. I kept reading. The timeline matched perfectly. That segment aired on a Tuesday. By Friday, 2 clients had canceled their contracts. The following month, the landlord raised the rent by 30%. By December, she had to let go of 3 workers. She stopped smiling that winter. And I'd always wondered why. I had never connected the dots. Never thought Gordon's empire, already spreading back then, had anything to do with it. But now I saw it clearly. This wasn't just a corporation grown fat on market strategy. This was personal. I took photos of the transcript and filed them in a hidden folder on my cloud drive, labeled Receipts, 2010. Back in my office, I drafted a confidential memo to the Ethics Committee. 2. Conflict Review Team. Subject: Formal request to revisit ethical wall date, redacted. As previously disclosed, I have personal history involving MediaGourd Inc. The attached materials indicate a direct link between a 2010 MediaGourd segment and irreversible damage caused to my family's laundromat. While this connection is personal, I believe it strengthens, not weakens, my capacity for impartial review. I am prepared to recuse myself from any segments that present emotional risk, and I will comply fully with firm policy. I request access to limited document review under supervision. Respectfully, Natalie Chen. I hit send before I could overthink it. Then I closed my laptop and walked out of the office without saying a word. That night, I didn't run. I didn't cook. I didn't turn on the TV. I called my mother. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm and soft from the kitchen. I could hear the gentle boil of something on the stove, ginger maybe, or pork broth. "Hi, Mom." "Natalie, everything okay?" "Yeah, I was thinking about the old place. Cleanspin." "Oh?" A pause. "What brought that on?" I told her I found something. Didn't say what. And I just wanted to hear about that time. Late 2010. The downturn. The rough winter. The changes. She went quiet. "Some people just want to see you shut down," she said finally. "They smile while they do it." My mother wasn't a bitter woman. She didn't speak in spite or drama. So when she said things like that, I listened. I let her tell me about the regulars who stopped coming in without explanation, the reporter who called and asked odd questions, the camera crew that filmed across the street for B-roll, how no one warned her, how they made her feel ashamed of a space she'd kept spotless for 2 decades. "I watched it once," she said. "The segment. They blurred out the names, but I knew our tile floors when I saw them." I closed my eyes. "I didn't want you to see it. You were still in school. And I didn't want you to feel small. I don't." That was the truth. I didn't feel small. Not anymore. I felt something else. Sharp. Focused. Ready. We talked for another 20 minutes. About soup. About laundry. About whether the neighborhood kids still dropped off their comforters before the holidays. She never once asked what I was working on. Maybe she already knew. After I hung up, I lay back on the couch, the dark ceiling above me stretching wide and empty. Outside, a siren wailed. A dog barked twice in reply. I opened my notes app one more time. We clean. We remember. We rebuild. And when the time comes, we hold the receipt to the light. Then I slept. And for the first time in weeks, I dreamed of soap, heat, and spinning drums. Not because I was trapped in it, but because I knew how to tear it down. The approval came on a Thursday. Subject: Limited access granted. MediaGourd doc review. No fanfare, no apologies, just a system notification and a line at the bottom. Review access authorized under monitoring protocol. All contributions logged. It wasn't a welcome. It was a leash. But I didn't care. They'd crack the door open and I was already halfway inside. My access was limited to review sets, production batches, metadata dumps, internal memos that hadn't made it to outside counsel. No litigation strategy, No client calls, no headlines, just documents. Thousands of them. That night, I made a pot of oolong, pulled my hair into a bun, and dove into the archive from my firm-assigned secure laptop. No downloads, no screenshots. Just a cold, controlled portal that blinked when it timed out every 60 minutes. I started tagging. Shell companies. Unusual asset transfers. Affiliate contracts with media-neutral vendors that build in the 7 figures for strategic analysis. It wasn't just smoke. It was fire, sealed in PDF format. The server room where I worked was always a few degrees too cold, the overhead fluorescents flickering like bad intentions. The windows looked out over the adjacent building's HVAC units, a view of industrial lungs exhaling through the night. I didn't mind. It kept me sharp. I built a whiteboard in the back corner of the room. Just a small one. Nothing that would violate protocol. No confidential names, no client data. Just code names, colors, and arrows. It started as a timeline. Then it grew into a map. The first node, a neutral acquisition of a digital classified site in 2014. MediaGord had acquired it through a shell registered to a holding company in the Cayman Islands. Harmless on its face. Unless you notice that 6 months later, that same digital platform began boosting MediaGord's local station coverage and suppressing ads from competitors. Another node, a company called Ridgespan Consulting. Technically unaffiliated, except that their biggest client was a MediaGord subsidiary, and their board included Gordon's former college roommate. The pattern repeated, again and again. Friendly tenders, coincidental timing, vertical integrations hidden beneath 5 layers of corporate camouflage. And the dates? That was the spine. Every key acquisition was perfectly timed around a competitor's financial dip. Every internal change coincided with a media cycle distraction. You couldn't fake that kind of precision. You could only plan it. I added dots. Red ones. Every time a local newsroom shut down within 18 months of a MediaGord acquisition, I marked it. By the time I hit the 6th week of review, the whiteboard looked like a constellation chart of dead stars. I lost one of my smaller clients during that stretch, a startup I'd advised since their seed round. The managing partner flagged me. Too many internal hours, not enough availability. We'll circle back in Q3. It stung, but not in the way it used to. I'd traded local fires for the war, and this war was just getting started. One night, sometime near midnight, Jackie wandered into the server room with 2 cups of vending machine cocoa. She didn't speak at first, just handed me the cup and studied the board. That ridge span arrow, she said. You checked the Delaware filings? I hadn't. I did. She was right. They'd changed registered agents 3 times in a single fiscal year. Every time, it aligned with a payout. How long have you known? Long enough, Jackie said. But no one listens until someone with a title starts caring. I stared at the board. Soon, they will. On the walk home that night, the sky was bruised with cloud, the streetlights casting halos on wet asphalt. I passed 3 homeless encampments and 2 men arguing outside a 24-hour liquor store. One shouted something about betrayal. The other just laughed. I kept walking. In my apartment, the air was stale with silence. I hadn't cleaned in days. Plates stacked in the sink. Laundry half folded. My own life starting to mirror the chaos I was trying to sort. I didn't mind. Not yet. I opened my notebook. The analog one. Not digital, not traceable. And I wrote 3 things. Leverage lies in pattern. Shells break when the timing is off. I don't need their permission to see clearly. By the end of the month, the board had grown a tail. A string of flagged invoices from a subsidiary called Juno West Metrics, all tied to a single internal code, P6NKL73. I cross-referenced that code with known vendor files. Nothing. But Jackie, again, was 2 steps ahead. Try crosswalking it through the media spend files, she said. The black budget stuff. I did. And found an entire campaign. Ad buys, influencer payments, even bot amplification. All tied to one Media Gourd segment that had aired 3 years ago. The topic? Rebuilding Urban Integrity, Why Small Media Can't Compete. It aired the same week 3 independent news outlets folded on the East Coast. I stared at the board until my eyes burned. Then I circled the Juno West node in red. That was the moment I stopped thinking about this as legal strategy. It was surgical. They didn't just want to dominate the market. They wanted to bleach the landscape. And I was going to uncover exactly how they did it. One node at a time. Quietly. Cleanly. Relentlessly. You don't walk into fire head-on, not when the fire has a name like Gordon Bell and a net worth that could buy senators. You crawl in. You become smoke. It started with a breadcrumb. I left a single sentence in a low-traffic internal channel, just a small note during a late-night review summary. The channel was shared between my team and 2 outside contractors, both vendors Gordon's firm had worked with before. The sentence read, "Noticed inconsistency in P6N KL73 invoices might indicate misclassification under procurement thresholds, could trigger audit flags if surfaced externally." I didn't tag anyone. I didn't highlight it. I just let it sit. Boring enough to overlook, technical enough to feel routine, and exactly the kind of thing Gordon's damage control team monitors, because I knew they watched that channel. Not directly, of course, but every time a vague reference appeared there, about Media Gourd, about offshore tenders, about shell entities, Gordon's in-house counsel would call within 48 hours to clarify language. They were twitchy, paranoid. That made them predictable. 3 days after I dropped the breadcrumb, an automated alert pinged our litigation tracking dashboard. Media Gourd had issued a voluntary data preservation hold to all internal departments. Not mandatory, not public. Just a quiet ripple. Enough to let their legal team start sweeping. But the thing about panic is, it never moves in a straight line. That same afternoon, someone at Media Gourd began deleting emails. At first, it was small. 2 inboxes, then 4. Then full user archives marked for deletion. They weren't careful, because they didn't know what we were watching. Our forensic team, quiet geniuses with social skills like driftwood, picked it up fast. They flagged it, time-stamped it, and began logging every keystroke. No one at Media Gourd realized yet that deletion in a modern legal environment is like throwing gasoline into a bonfire and praying the smoke doesn't talk. By the end of the week, we had full logs of internal deletion instructions metadata that showed the timing matched our breadcrumb drop IP traces back to a Media Gourd executive office. The emails themselves? Most were recoverable. But even if they weren't, the act of deletion under a known preservation hold is enough. Obstruction. Intent. I stared at the timeline we built on the whiteboard. Breadcrumb dropped. Monday. Preservation hold, Thursday. First deletion, Friday, 9:12 a.m. Full user archive wiped, Saturday, 1:03 a.m. Let's package it, I told Martin. We've got breach of hold, timeline correlation, and pattern obstruction. That's more than enough to start formal notice. He didn't even argue. By now, even he had stopped pretending I didn't belong on the team. Our first step was quiet. Notice letters to Media Gourd's general counsel, alerting them to spoliation risk. Routine language, professional tone. But the message was loud. We see you. I crafted the body of the letter myself. Every sentence was precise, controlled. I ended it with a paragraph that read, "To preserve the integrity of any future discovery obligations, we strongly recommend an immediate halt to all automated deletion protocols across impacted departments. Please confirm your compliance by close of business." No threat. Just light. And nothing exposes mold faster. Inside MediaGord, they scrambled. I knew this because 2 days later, Gordon called Scott. I wasn't supposed to know that, but I did. Scott's text came in at 10:43 p.m. He thinks someone's leaking. Asked me if you're okay. I didn't reply. Then a second message. Did you start something? I stared at that one longer, as if I hadn't been quietly suffocating under his brother's casual cruelty for years. As if I hadn't watched him laugh at my work, erase my family's name with a shrug, then hand me a glass of wine and say I was overreacting. So I typed back. Deleted. Typed again. Deleted. Then finally wrote, pick a side. Scott didn't reply. I didn't expect him to. That weekend, the weather turned hard. Rain against the window in sheets, like the sky was trying to scrub the city raw. I worked through it. The forensics team fed me packet after packet. I laid out the timeline like a crime scene. The more we mapped, the clearer it became. They didn't just delete, they followed a list. Someone at the top had ranked internal assets by exposure risk. A code system, W1 to W5, with W5 matching Gordon's own internal mail queue. W5 messages were deleted first. That list was damning. Not because it proved guilt, but because it showed preparation. You don't delete an order unless you know what to fear. And Gordon feared something. Monday morning, I dropped the match. We filed a preservation escalation notice with the FTC. Attached was a sealed memo labeled Possible Obstruction Indicators, MediaGord Internal Behavior, Pre-Notice. It wasn't public. Not yet. But it was formal. And in regulatory chess, once the knight moves into position, the board doesn't reset. That afternoon, Gordon went on air. A rare live appearance. 10 minutes. Topic: free speech, fake news, and government overreach. He didn't mention the FTC directly, but he looked into the camera with that polished mix of sincerity and threat and said, "Some people want to silence us, not with argument, but with bureaucracy. Let me be clear, we don't scare easy, and we clean our own house." I watched the clip on mute. I watched his jaw tighten on the third sentence. I watched his thumb twitch when the host asked about data integrity. And I knew. He felt it now. Not the case, not the leak. The pressure. The air getting thinner. I stood in the hallway outside our war room, staring at the glass wall as the team worked inside. Charts, laptops, soft voices in constant sync. My phone buzzed again. Scott. Just a single text. "You know he won't go down quietly." I stared at it. Let the silence stretch. Then I tapped back. "Neither do we." And walked back into the light. The war room wasn't named that officially, but the name stuck. It was the largest internal conference space on the 14th floor. Glass walls, blackout blinds, sound insulation. At any hour of the day, it buzzed with quiet voices, blinking monitors, color-coded workflows, and legal pads bleeding ink. We didn't shout. We didn't posture. We built. The execution plan was a living thing, updated daily, broken into tiers. Tier 1, regulatory agencies. Tier 2, document controls. Tier 3, narrative strategy. I owned Tier 1. It was my hand that drew the line between antitrust violation and systemic suppression. My fingers that combed through hundreds of acquisition memos, finding the consistent manipulations of market position just low enough to avoid HSR filings. The real trick wasn't buying a monopoly. It was buying in increments that no one tracked. Until we tracked them all. It was slow, methodical, and devastating. And I could feel Gordon in every decision. His fingerprints were all over the architecture, companies renamed just before mergers, licensing deals rewritten to reduce public ownership reporting, regulatory disclosures that omitted non-material details which, when stacked, revealed something deeply material. By now, I had built a matrix, a visual skeleton of how MediaGourd was structured: shell firms, affiliate networks, and content control loops. It looked less like a corporation and more like a hydra. Cut one head, three more filed new trademarks in Nevada. But even hydras can be mapped. And once mapped, cornered. Mid-month, we finalized the first wave of referrals. One to the FTC, complaint draft, highlighting coordinated market consolidation. One to the SEC, shell irregularities, suspicious cash flows, and insider transfer patterns. One to the IRS, documentation of questionable nonprofit grants that looped back into for-profit campaigns. Each packet was clean, professional, verified. I'd reviewed every sentence twice. By the end of the week, the managing partner had approved public disclosure timelines. He asked who should take point on press coordination. Martin looked at me. Natalie's the best voice for this. That was new. But I didn't flinch. I laid out the next phase: editorial briefings, anonymous source coordination, data visualizations. The goal wasn't to scream scandal, it was to show rot. Quietly, precisely, unarguably. But strategy has a cost. That night, I got a message. It was from Scott. "Can you slow down?" No greeting, no context. Just that. I stared at it on my screen, the cursor blinking beneath it like a dare. I typed, "This is my job." Deleted. Typed again. "You've known who he is for years." Deleted. Then finally wrote, "Then pick a side," and hit send. He didn't reply. We didn't speak again for 2 weeks. That same night, I opened my notes and added a line. "Sympathy is the oldest tool of power. Don't let it soften the blade." On Thursday, we moved into final review. The room felt colder that day, but no one said it. The blinds were drawn. The coffee was burned. We were surgical now. I presented the package. "This is the sequence," I said. "We file with the regulators by noon Monday. The editorial briefings go live 72 hours later. No leaks before that. All reporters vetted, all timelines coordinated." There were nods, scribbles, a few raised eyebrows. I pressed forward. "We use the term quiet purge. Not scandal, not exposure. Purge. Let them call it cleansing. Let them own the metaphor." The partner smiled. "You're good at this." I didn't answer. It wasn't praise I wanted. It was closure. Outside, the street cleaners passed beneath our windows, brushes hissing against the asphalt. The road shimmered wet and bare in the morning light. For a moment, I thought of my mother, kneeling by the washing machine late at night, scrubbing out stains with lemon and salt because she refused to let shame set in. She never raised her voice, but she always got the mark out. That was what this was. Not revenge. Restoration. That night, I walked home instead of taking a cab. The city was colder than usual, wind slicing between buildings, whispering around my collar. I passed a TV in a shop window, tuned to one of Gordon's smaller stations. A familiar anchor read headlines about inflation, unrest, culture wars. I recognized the tone. Gordon had coached that cadence himself. I stood there for 5 full minutes just watching, letting the sound fade behind the glass. Then I kept walking. Back in my apartment, the lights stayed off. I didn't need them. I sat down, opened my notebook, and wrote, "You don't win by burning it down. You win by breaking it cleanly, so that when it falls, the sound of it cannot be denied." Then I shut the notebook, drank water straight from the bottle, and let the darkness settle like peace. Monday was coming, and with it, the light. The first headline dropped on a Tuesday at 6:07 a.m. Not a firestorm, a spark. Just enough to catch the edge of the kindling. It read, "A quiet purge. MediaGourd's secret consolidation network." Byline, investigative team, Herald Global. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the digital dashboard instead, watching impressions climb. 4,000, then 12,000, then 83,000. By 9 a.m., it had trended. Not globally, not even nationally, but in the right circles. Policy wonks, digital media analysts, think tank grunts, FCC aides, the kind of people who don't comment. They forward. The piece didn't scream. It whispered with authority, laying out the map, the shell entities, the quiet closures of community media outlets, the timing around elections, the centralized control loops disguised as localized affiliate strategy. It didn't name Gordon directly, but it didn't have to. Everyone already knew whose shadow stretched across the system. By 10:30 a.m., alumni began sharing the article across our internal Slack channels. Old friends from Columbia Law, ex-interns from my first federal clerkship, even a journalist I once dated for 2 months and blocked after he tried to pitch me as a source. They were calling it surgical. "You really mapped the skeleton," one message read. "It's a dissection." I didn't reply to any of them. I was already in the war room, prepping the second wave. The follow-up was timed for Thursday. Leaked footage. Not by us, by someone else. Someone inside MediaGord's West Coast affiliate who'd had enough. The video was internal. Cell phone footage. A private all-staff meeting. Gordon stood at the front of the room, sleeves rolled, voice sharp. He didn't know he was being recorded. The audio was clear. "People like her? They're background noise. We use them, then dump them. That's how you scale. By staying clean. Ruthless. Not sentimental." No name, but the pronoun hung heavy. And the clean metaphor? It was deliberate. Too perfect to be a coincidence. I watched the clip in the war room, muted. Everyone did. The room was silent. No one breathed. I watched it again. Alone. This time with the sound on. He said it like it was doctrine. Like cruelty was a strategy. Like I had never existed outside the service I provided. My hands were steady. My jaw was not. That afternoon, I filed the supplemental memo with the FTC, attaching transcript fragments, noting public relevance, pointing to the impact on staff testimony under current preservation holds. We didn't accuse, we documented. That's how you win these wars. Not with outrage, with process. Still, the wave hit harder than expected. By Friday morning, 3 major advertisers announced temporary pauses with MediaGord stations. 2 board members resigned quietly. The MediaGord Twitter account deleted 67 past tweets in 1 hour. And Gordon? He doubled down. He went on air that night with a solo commentary, unscripted, defiant, and unraveling. He said witch hunt 3 times. He called the regulators weaponized. He said, and I quote, "What we're witnessing is a digital mob masquerading as justice. They want to destroy legacy media because they can't control it." Well, guess what? We control ourselves, and we don't answer to noise. But it wasn't noise now. It was record. He didn't know what was coming, because the deletion logs, captured weeks ago by our forensics team, were now paired with voice matches from his recorded meeting. Same date, same directive, same voice. It wasn't hearsay anymore. It was obstruction. In his words, in his voice, in his time. That weekend, I went back to the river path. Not to run, just to walk. The air smelled of wet concrete and tulip bulbs. Early spring clawing out from winter's claws. I passed the bench I'd sat on that first night, back when Gordon mocked my job and no one blinked. I sat again. This time, I wasn't shaken. I was centered. I pulled out my phone, opened notes, scrolled past every line I'd written, until I reached the top. We clean. Quietly. And beneath it, added, then we document. We archive. We wait. I closed the app, watched a jogger run by, oblivious to the wars we wage in quiet rooms and server logs. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just watched the river move. Slow, persistent, reshaping the banks. One quiet second at a time. The FTC hearing room was colder than I expected, government air conditioning that seemed designed to keep skin tight and throats dry. It smelled like carpet glue and nerves. I sat across the aisle from Gordon. 6 months ago, he'd laughed at my job over duck and wine. Now he sat flanked by 3 lawyers in tailored suits, his cufflinks still gleaming but his posture more rigid, less amused. The room wasn't packed, just agency staff, legal teams, and 2 observers from the Hill who didn't introduce themselves. They didn't have to. Everyone knew who watched these kinds of things, even if they never said it out loud. We weren't there to try the case. Not yet. This was a preliminary investigative hearing, evidence presentation, scope debate, and whether full proceedings were warranted under expanded jurisdiction. But Gordon looked like a man on trial. He didn't glance at the exhibits, didn't consult with counsel. He watched me. His eyes locked on mine the second I sat down. He mouthed something. I read it clearly. It was you. I didn't flinch. I leaned slightly forward, hands folded on the table, and whispered back, "You said I was dirt. I buried you in facts." He blinked once. That was enough. Across the room, our lead partner presented the case. Charts, timelines, witness statements, the deletion logs, the segment transcript. The clip where Gordon said, "We use them, then dump them." His lawyers tried to call it taken out of context. We had the full context. 15 minutes of uninterrupted footage showing him refer to low-value internal assets and cleaning house before the bleeding starts. That didn't sound like a man misquoted. That sounded like doctrine. The committee asked 3 key questions. Was MediaGord aware of document preservation requirements at the time of deletion? Did the internal classification system indicate intentional shielding of sensitive communications? Were any nonprofit affiliates used to funnel revenue to for-profit campaigns without clear public disclosure? To all 3, we had answers. Factual, clean, tied to timestamps and cross-referenced source material. No emotion, no speculation, just evidence. And Gordon? He didn't speak. His lead counsel objected to most lines of questioning, claimed it was a fishing expedition dressed as oversight. The chairwoman smiled. "We're not fishing. We're mapping the coastline." By noon, we'd entered the final phase of the session, rebuttals and closing comments. MediaGord's counsel requested additional time to review the evidentiary basis of recent leaks. That was their tactic now. Cry foul about process, try to turn exposure into a liability. They even filed an internal ethics complaint against our firm that same morning. Said we'd weaponized insider access for personal gain. Said I had compromised objectivity due to past personal entanglements. It took compliance 5 days to review the claim. 5 days of internal interviews, form disclosures, audit trails, 5 days of silence from half my team, eyes flicking toward me like I might vanish if the ruling went the wrong way. The decision came on a Friday at 4:23 p.m. I was sitting in the glass stairwell, watching traffic below, my fingers tracing a crack in the steel banister. The managing partner found me. "Natalie." I looked up. He handed me the printed memo. Investigation concluded. No policy breach, no violation. Conduct consistent with firm ethics and obligations. That's all it said. No apology, no congratulations. Just a nod of institutional validation. I folded it once and put it in my pocket. Didn't smile, didn't cry. But that night when I got home, I opened my laptop, pulled up the first photo I'd ever taken of the MediaGord takedown memo, the one from the archive room months ago, and stared at it. Not for revenge, for proof. Because once, I hadn't even been allowed in the room. Now I'd mapped the whole damn house. Scott texted me that evening. "I saw the segment. The clip. I didn't know it went that deep. I let the message sit, then typed, "You were in the room. You chose silence." Deleted. Tried again. "Knowing isn't enough if you don't act." Deleted. Then wrote simply, "I know." He sent back a single line, "I'm sorry." But it was 6 months too late. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat on the floor of my apartment with the lights off, my laptop glowing beside me, and added to my notes, "The silence is louder than the scream, and heavier than the lie." I closed the file, and for the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking. The consent decree landed with the quiet weight of something irreversible. No press release, no dramatic hearing, just an upload to a federal docket at 8:14 a.m. on a Wednesday. 47 pages, no victory speech, no grandstanding, just sentences that ended empires. MediaGord agreed to unwind 6 acquisitions. The shell entities? Dissolved or forced into transparency. Any vendor with ties to management had to register and report under third-party scrutiny. And Gordon? Personal restrictions. He could no longer approve or sign off on M&A activity for 3 years. Could not enter boardrooms where divestiture negotiations were taking place. Could not oversee internal legal strategy. There was a list. Rooms he could not enter. Deals he could not touch. He wasn't removed. He was made irrelevant. And that, for someone like Gordon, was the greater wound. The monitorship was the final blow. An external monitor, selected by the FTC, granted access to internal communication channels, board minutes, executive calendars, and strategic forecasting tools. Everything MediaGord had built on secrecy and illusion was now subject to daylight. By month's end, 3 partner firms resigned. 1 advertising agency pulled their retainer. Ratings began to plateau, then slide. You could feel it in the air. The shows weren't angry anymore, just tired, forced, scripted rage with no fire behind the eyes, then quiet. 1 flagship program went dark, for a creative refresh. Another restructured its host lineup. One of the digital magazines sold off its archives to a private equity firm that promptly paywalled all content. The culture was collapsing from the inside. Meanwhile, I didn't say a word. I didn't call Scott. I didn't respond when Lena emailed me a single sentence. "You've made your point." I didn't need them to understand. Understanding wasn't the point. But one morning, during that strange hush between collapse and whatever comes after, I received a message. It was a text from Scott. I didn't know it meant that much. That was all. I stared at it for a long time, phone resting on my desk next to a sealed envelope from the monitor's office. I could see the bolded heading inside. Quarterly compliance review. Action summary required. It felt strange, receiving messages like that in the aftermath. As if now that the explosion was over, people thought it was safe to offer regret. As if apology meant something when spoken in ruins. I didn't respond. I let the screen dim. My hands turned back to the work. That week, I was on 3 calls with the Monitors team. We walked through timelines, corrective steps, failure points. I offered insight into the acquisition strategies that were no longer theoretical. We discussed remedies, structural relief, ongoing compliance. I used to think those words were bloodless. Now I understood their power. They weren't about punishment. They were about reconstruction. I took meetings in silence. I listened more than I spoke. When I did speak, it was clear, spare, exact. Not bitter. Because I wasn't. Not anymore. One evening, after a long strategy session, I found myself walking past the old laundromat. Clean Spin had closed 5 years ago, but the building still stood. A Pilates studio occupied half of it now. The other half was a juice bar that always seemed empty. I stood across the street and stared at the brick. I remembered my mother wiping down folding tables before opening, steam curling off hot sheets, her hands rough from bleach and faith. She never complained. She never cursed the cameras that ruined her. She just started over. And I didn't burn it all down. I filed it, cataloged it, turned it into exhibits. And that was the difference between vengeance and precision. Before I turned to leave, I added one final note in my private journal. You don't need to shout when the paperwork screams for you. That night, I slept with the windows open and dreamed of quiet things dismantled cleanly. The NYU auditorium smelled like paper, dust, and coffee. Not fresh coffee, coffee that had steeped into the carpet and walls over decades, academic and bitter. I stood backstage, palms pressed against the cool wood of the podium. The lights were low beyond the curtain. Rows of seats filled slowly with students, alumni, law clerks, interns. The kind of crowd that still believed institutions could be fixed if you filed the right motion. In the front row sat my mother. She wore the same brown cardigan she always brought to cold rooms, the one with bleach stains near the cuffs. Her hands were folded in her lap, calm, steady, just like always. She didn't need to say anything. Her being there was enough. The moderator tapped my shoulder. 2 minutes. I nodded. Behind me was the deck, 19 slides, none with bullet points. No one needed a list. They needed a story. At 7 p.m. sharp, the mic clicked on. I stepped out into the light. It wasn't a standing ovation, it was silence. The kind that waits. Not to be entertained, but to be told something true. I took a breath, then another, and I began. You don't beat power by shouting at it, I said. You beat it by finding the spine. Slide 1. A map of affiliate shell companies. And breaking it. Quietly. I walked them through the architecture, how MediaGord had mimicked organic growth while manufacturing market dominance. I showed them how small newsrooms died without fanfare, how legislation was skirted by volume, not brilliance. Slide 8. The deletion log. Obstruction doesn't always look like a hammer. Sometimes it's a schedule, an email flag, a pattern of silence. Slide 14. The transcript. Gordon's words. We use them, then dump them. I paused. Not for effect, for breath. Because even a year later, I still felt the sting of it. And still knew I'd turned it into a weapon. Slide 17. The consent decree. Black and white. Clinical. But behind the words was everything we'd done. This didn't happen because someone shouted loud enough. It happened because we didn't stop cleaning. We documented. We verified. We waited. And when the time was right, we moved. The final slide was a quote. From my notes. From the first night I ever felt the shape of this war. We don't scream. We clean. I stepped away from the podium, looked at my mother. She smiled. For the first time in weeks, I smiled back. The mic clicked off, and applause rolled forward like rain. It wasn't explosive. It was relentless. A wave of hands meeting hands, echoing off the ceiling beams and hard floors. The kind of applause that doesn't ask for more, but says we heard you. Afterward, a law student approached me, wide-eyed, clutching a notebook like a lifeline. Can I ask? She hesitated. Was it worth it? I thought about Gordon's face in that hearing room. I thought about the quiet click of the monitor's report every quarter. I thought about the cities where local reporters were rehired, where ads stopped bleeding truth off the page. I thought about my mother, folding towels with the same care she folded her dignity every time someone looked down on her work. Yes, I said, then added, but only if you know what you're cleaning for. She nodded, wrote that down. Outside, New York was bright and cold. The wind cut hard, but it carried the promise of spring beneath it, like the air itself was shedding something old. I pulled on my coat, walked to the end of the block, where the lights turned green and the crosswalk sign blinked clean across. I did not look back. Some things are best left in the rear view, especially when you've already scrubbed them down to the bone.